order the Board of Education meeting of September 29th, 2020 at 7:01 p.m. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, just because we are in a hybrid model, just again do a roll call of board members. I believe virtually we have Karina Drake.
Here.
Liz Flogel.
Here.
In person we have Nora Gatos. Here. Kathleen Holes.
Here.
Rachel Ruggieri. Here. Sean McAvoy.
Here.
Ken Jober.
Here.
Jonathan Steckler.
Here.
And myself. All right, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our website. Members of the public have the ability to watch this meeting through a live stream on our Board of Education website and YouTube channel. Regarding public comment will be submitted in writing through a link which is now open and available on our Board of Education website as a pop-up. We'll be open from now until the point in our meeting where we get to the agenda portion, which is correspondence to the board. Written comments will be read aloud by Vice Chair Jonathan Steckler. Okay. On to our first item, which is reports. The first is the chair report. And I'm sad to say that this is Karina Drake's last meeting, as you know. Tomorrow is her last official day as a Board of Education member. Personally, Karina, I'm going to miss your dedication to all the students, and especially as a voice for those students who have exceptionalities. 3 years ago, we ran together, and in the time since, you've taught me so much about the topics that you're passionate about. Some words from some other Board of Education members that I'll share. While serving on the board, your heart was always there for our children. You're a valuable member of our community for sure. As we grew better from her work, so did she. Another one. Karina has a lovely sense of humor, is a wonderful mom, colleague, and would pound the pavement when we were up for election. She cares about the constituency and truly listens. So Karina, on behalf of all the Board of Education and the students and staff of the Ridgefield Public Schools, thank you so much for your service over the past few years. We're going to miss you.
You're welcome. It was an honor to serve.
As a reminder to members of the public that may be considering applying for the vacancy, letters of interest are due to my attention today, so you still have a few hours to send an email if you haven't already. Also, as moving on with my chair report, we had our board retreat earlier this week with some members of administration as well as with the Board of Education members. I think it was a productive session around district priorities and possible future agenda items. We developed the start of a charter for the Board of Education using Ruler as a framework. And we concluded with a board self-evaluation that provided some honest feedback about how we met or perhaps didn't meet our goals last year. And we identified some actions for this upcoming year under each Board of Education goal. One of those goals being to redo our goals in the summer of 2021. On to the superintendent's report.
Well, it feels like we just met last week, which I think we did, so I'm going to have just a few short announcements. We did welcome back our kindergarten through second grade students today. Overall, it was a very good day according to our principals. I think there were a few traffic jams that will work out over the next couple days, and hopefully that will sort itself through quicker sooner than later. Our students in grades 3 through 5, as a reminder, will join us next Monday, so that means all of our elementary children will be back by October 5th. Our students in grades 6 through 8 who have IEPs, are English language learners, or receiving intervention services, we're also offered the opportunity to come back in full, and so we're still working out those small details. In the coming months, we will have flu shots available for our staff. We're coordinating that with Aaron Crooks, who's here tonight. And we also have a tentative date for graduation. I know families are very anxious about this. It is tentative, as WestCon will only be able to confirm as of January 1st. But the tentative date is Friday, June 11th at 4 p.m. So if you want to pencil that into your calendars, not with a pen or a marker, but pencil Friday, June 11th at 4 p.m. And I think that's it for me.
Great, thank you. Moving on to some of our committees, Budget, Finance, and Operations Committee. John.
So the Budget, Finance, and Operations Committee met last Monday, the 21st. We discussed the year-end numbers for fiscal 1920, showing savings of approximately $1.7 million. We'll go into that further detail later this Probably $600,000 of that is going to go into the newly formed carryover account for the Board of Education. And most of that, if not all of that, all of that and more will be used to cover some unbudgeted COVID-related expenses. To date, as of last week, that was almost $900,000. We discussed transfers for the end of fiscal year 20, which was about $1.9 million worth of transfers. And then we looked at estimated unbudgeted COVID expenditures going forward for the rest of this year to the tune of another $1.5 million.
Thank you. And I know we'll be talking about quite a few of those items later.
Yeah, I didn't want to steal our time.
Thank you. Just the trailer. Okay, moving on to the policy committee. Karina?
We also met on the 21st, and the 4 policies that will come before you tonight are what we went over in that meeting.
Great, thank you. And just as just for the board, since Karina, as I said, her seat will be vacant come Thursday. She was chair of the policy committee, so I think just in the interim time until we rename committees in December, I'll just serve as the interim chair since it's probably only 1 or 2 more policy meetings anyway. So. Okay, on to our liaison update. Liz Flugel, legislative liaison.
Yeah, so there's, thank you, there is quite a bit going on. So Senate, on the federal level, Senate Bill 4360, which we discussed at the retreat, as well as in emails that are foilable. Chris Murphy of Connecticut has indicated that he wants to support local educational groups and local boards of ed to terminate contracts with local law enforcement. This bill has been introduced at the federal level. And indicates in Section 5A that no federal funds can be utilized for law enforcement. Obviously, we have a very strong partnership with our local Ridgefield Police Department and rely on them for not only school safety, but also other functions as well. And so I would recommend that the board add this to an upcoming agenda. This is the second or third time we made that request, and so I would like to introduce it as an agenda topic for the next meeting of the Board of Education. So I don't know what we need to do about that. There's also a few other things on the federal level that have been introduced, but not past the introduction, and do not have text associated with them yet. I could not get to the bills as of today online. There's one around additional training for educators around child abuse and prevention. That's HR Bill 8396. And then there's another one, HR Bill 8391, for developing grants for teaching artificial intelligence from the National Science Foundation. But neither one of those have actual bill text. So the most critical federal bill is still Senate Bill 4360 around SROs and the lack of support for them that Mr. Murphy would like to introduce at the federal level. On the state level, Governor Lamont recently is announced he wants to pull the legislature together for a special session. Related to education, there is a bond commission that is talking about ventilation systems in schools. I could not find text of that, but the things that would impact, I believe there's a hearing next Tuesday at 10:30 at the state level about that bond commission. But again, I couldn't find any text other than that those things support ventilation systems in schools. So I will share with the board more when I know. In addition to that, on the agenda for the upcoming legislative session, there is an intent to try to get approval for new construction or renovation projects in school districts across Connecticut that have already been approved by local taxpayers. 11 districts are benefiting from that. It's about $500 million in funding. Ridgefield is not one of those because we don't have any renovation or new construction on the docket for this year, where some of our neighboring towns are going to benefit from new elementary schools and significant renovation funds. So those things are on the docket. There's one other note in the declaration to bring the legislature together from Governor Lamont that talks about one-time funding for COVID expenses should not be included in the education cost sharing calculations. So that will be on the docket for next week as well.
Thank you. And I do believe that we will have SROs on the agenda for the October 13th meeting. But Liz, perhaps if you could just follow up in terms of the status of that bill 4360. My understanding from CABE's Government Relations Department is that actually the last hearing for the term was September 23rd, and it didn't include this bill, so it wasn't moving forward. So perhaps before the
According
next
to the
meeting.
government website today, it said it was still on the introduced status.
Okay, all right, great, so just.
So it may not have been updated, but certainly the information is still out on Kate's website as well as the federal government, Senate website
Okay,
as introduced.
thank you.
So I'll find out.
Thank you. And perhaps we can talk about, I know on the Board of Education website, we have a part where for legislative advocacy and updates. Perhaps we can put the language of that bill or any others that we want to discuss on there so that the public can see them. So we can talk about listing those.
I'm going to apologize, Margaret, I can barely hear. But
Oh, I'm
if you
sorry.
can send it,
I was saying that we could post it on our website, the bill language.
On our website, okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Other liaison reports. Kathleen, I don't know if the PTA recently.
We meet, what is it, the second Monday, or second Friday?
Coming up.
It's coming up again. We met, and you know what, Dr. De Silva's there with me, and the last time I was there, she reported everything that was done, so,
So we have another meeting, I think, this Friday.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think this is Friday.
I have the dates written down, but I'm not memorizing.
Any other liaison reports? And Kathleen used to do the census stuff. Is there anything?
You know, I think we have until, a lot has come in, I haven't heard any updates, but you can still send it in if you haven't done it yet, please.
Okay,
It does give us money.
great. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next items on our agenda, which is the approval of meeting minutes. Karina, do I have a motion regarding the meeting minutes from August 24th?
I move that the board approve the meeting minutes from August 24th, 2020.
Do I have a second? Ken? Okay, any comments or changes? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, that looks like 8 of us. All those opposed? All those abstaining? Liz? Okay, so 8-1, that passes, thank you. Karina, do I have a motion regarding the meeting minutes from August 26th?
I move that the board accept the meeting minutes from August 26th, 2020.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Kathleen? Any comments or changes? Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. It's like, Karina, are you? Abstaining, okay. So that's 7. All those opposed? All those abstaining? That's 2. Okay, thank
Well,
you.
then, you know what, we should have Elizabeth Vogel taken off, because they have her down as a member present in the minutes. Is that the virtual Zoom meeting?
Yep.
Yeah, it has Liz on there. Do you see it?
Oh, yeah. Yes, so Liz, you were not at that meeting?
Kathleen,
Pardon?
I wasn't at that meeting, I don't think.
Well, no, it says you are, but you abstained, so I was thinking that you weren't there. I don't know. I don't remember personally, because it was Zoom.
Right.
I just wanted to amend the minutes if you weren't.
Okay. So those in favor of approving the minutes as amended to move Liz Wilbur then to members absent, please raise your hand if you're in favor of that.
Was that on the 24th?
The 26th.
26th, yes.
Okay.
Were you absent?
It was short, Liz.
I think she just said she was absent. No.
Oh, she wasn't.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so again, so the minutes pass as amended, 7 in favor, and then 2 abstaining. Thank you, thanks Stephanie for pointing that out. Okay, moving on to the next agenda item, which is the reopening update.
Okay, so there's nothing significant to update since our last meeting, but just 3 items I wanted to be sure to mention. The feedback that we received and I spoke to the last time we met was around teacher feedback, specifically around the amount of time needed for planning, professional development, and also just discussing students and where did students progress. Those 3 areas continue to be in need. We have come together as a steering committee and made efforts to plan around what that might look like. And so right now, we have not been able to process it fully at this point. We are looking to likely offer students some type of asynchronous learning to offer our teachers that time for planning PD and/or supporting students who may require some more strategic planning. That said, we just need time to process what that actually will look like. I will say this, is that at this point, we feel that it's hard to make a decision for the entire year. So likely we'll be making some short-term decisions around a couple of months. So for example, we may say that we're gonna provide students with asynchronous learning on a Wednesday afternoon. So students would be remotely learning from home on a Wednesday afternoon. We may do that for 2 months, let's just say, but not for the entire year, because we really don't know what the experience is going to look like for students and for faculty for an entire year. So what I will say is that families will hear from us. There will be some type of opportunity for teachers to come back together. It's clear that it's a need for them. You might remember at the start of the year when we were limited to 900 hours, that we pulled back some of that planning time because we really had to be sure that we were meeting the state law around the number of hours. That's not the case anymore, so we do have some flexibility, and it's clear from our teachers that they need it, and that would be K-12. So we're still planning around it. We want to be really thoughtful and strategic, and as much as we've tried to do over the course of the week, we just really haven't gotten our heads around exactly what that's going to look like in terms of equity, whether it's cohorts A, B, and just being sure that there's an allocated a right amount of time there. And as you know, the experience right now is different for elementary than it is for secondary, so we just need a little bit more time. So families can expect to hear from us. And again, it won't be that students won't have learning, but it may be a shortened schedule or something along those lines, so that our teachers can have that opportunity. Because right now, they don't have any planning time built into their schedule outside of their contractual prep and lunch. Any questions on that?
So and again, it's planning, it's not professional development.
It could be a combination of. So what we heard from our teacher feedback is they need time. When I'm speaking about professional development, I'm not talking about professional development for training outside of the experience that we're providing for students at this time, i.e. technology training, i.e. we need to compact the curriculum, i.e. where does it look like for assessments for students in the digital experience versus a full experience? What does it mean to compact a course into 80 minutes, a class into 80 minutes versus 42? So that's the type of professional development, and sometimes those lines can be crossed a little bit. Planning sometimes can be led by a department leader, and that can be planning and PD at the same time. What I'm not talking about is PD related to a particular primary resource that we have or a particular program. That's not what our faculty has expressed the need, but rather the need around the experience that our students are getting this year.
Right, because I think when we redid the calendars, we also moved those professional development days to the beginning of the year as well, right? So there aren't those ongoing PD opportunities?
So for our faculty, they lost really all of the professional development days and or the extra planning that they had via those early dismissal days. So for them, it is a significant difference, and it's clear that they're saying we need some time to make the shifts, and now that we're in the model, make the shifts that are necessary. And again, I own that, because at the start of the year, we needed the hours. And so my primary focus was to get kids in. We had to shorten the school day, if you remember, at the beginning and the end for transition and cohorting purposes. And now it's clear that our faculty is saying, we need time, can you help us? And so what that looks like, what we didn't want to do is bring you something that just wasn't fully processed. So I think as a steering committee over the next week, we'll process those details, figure out what makes the most sense, be sure that we communicate that to families in a thoughtful way, giving them ample notice, in particular at the elementary where they may need to adjust for childcare or pickups or things like that. So we're thinking towards the end of October, this wouldn't be like next week. Any questions? Okay. The second piece of feedback that we've received, and it's not a significant amount, but we have received some feedback primarily from families around attendance. And so whether that's informally or formally, but by way of email to either myself or to principals, that they're unclear of they're unclear as to how their child may be documented, let's just say, in terms of their attendance. So for example, if we send a child home because the child is kept home because he or she has the sniffles and elects to remote learn because he or she feels fine, but yet has the sniffles, does that count as an absence? Is it called an absence excused? Is it just a remote? And so the state is requiring that we track students in these various scenarios, and how we do that at the school level and communicate that to parents, we just haven't done enough of, just because of the information that we're receiving and the timing in which we're receiving it. So over the course of this week, we're gonna iron out all those details so that families understand that if your child is remote learning because they need to quarantine, because they have a symptom, but yet the remote learning just happens not to be it happens to be their in-school day, what that actually would mean for a family, right? And just so the parents can feel relieved that it's okay. On the flip side, we don't want children remote learning if there's no reason why they should be remote learning and they should be in school. And so parents need to understand that as well. But we just need to iron out some of those details, so that's the second piece of reopening that we're working on right now.
Okay, can we ask questions on that?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So my questions on that, so it's good about the communications, but my questions on that are around, like, so what are the implications of kids having too many absences, let's say, on their transcript? Like, I know at the high school, that actually has implications for National Honor Society.
That's
I would hope in this situation, things get looked at, but,
So
or the
that's-
generation can.
Right, so that's the fear of parents, is that you're telling me I have to keep my child home for one of these reasons, but yet, is that going to impact truancy, National Honor Society, all those things? And the reality is no, of course it wouldn't, right? Because they're going online and they're accessing the experience, the remote experience. It's different if they were so sick that they couldn't access their learning and they're absent. That's a different type of situation. That said, we also want to be sure that we're communicating clearly to families that we don't want them going back and forth because of the sake of going back and forth, or they're taking a long weekend and now their child is in the car accessing their learning. That's not the reason that they would be, let's just say at the secondary level, that would not be the reason that they would be remote experience learning rather than in-school experience learning, because that's not the intent. But again, I think it's really hard to communicate that with all the various scenarios without explaining that clearly to families and memorializing it on our end, communicating that with our faculty as well, and then being able to document it in PowerSchool in a way that everyone can understand, so that we can also track the children that are actually sick, right? So the children that are actually sick and understanding what that means for contact tracing and the like is equally important. So we just have to be sure that we're coding it correctly. We have to be sure that our teachers understand it in the same way, and that our families understand when it's okay to remote and when it's not. Any other questions on that piece? And the third piece is just so everyone understands, we're communicating this now, and I'll be sure to communicate it on my Friday message, is that we are updating the health and safety protocols on our reopening webpage and our document. That's actually a live document for us so that we can continue to update it. We receive new updates from the state often, frequently, whether they're by way of calls or an actual addendum or some type of notice. So families should always refer back to the health and safety protocols that are on our webpage and on our document so that they get the most up-to-date, accurate information. We're not going to send out a notice every single day because I don't think that's a good use of our communication system, and certainly not a way that families can keep track. But I would recommend that families continue to go to that resource when they have questions. Questions on that? So that's it since last week.
Can we ask general questions?
Yes,
about
yes,
reopening?
absolutely.
I don't know, does
Yeah.
anybody have general questions, or? I wanted to ask only because, again, who knows what next week brings? And it's been a while since we've talked about the moderate risk scenario and the high risk scenario, and hopefully we won't be in those, but it could happen, and I think the last time we talked about that was actually before schools had even opened. So I know for myself, I think I could envision it better, what that moderate scenario would look like now, knowing what the kids' experience actually is right now.
Okay, so actually, I'm gonna go to that, but before, there was one other point I wanted to mention on reopening. The one thing that we are planning on doing this week, just so our high school parents know, the same process that we worked through at the middle school in terms of looking at the space and measuring the space is happening this week at the high school. So I know families at the high school level are anxious to hear if there's going to be any changes by the end of the quarter, which is at the end of the month. We're planning on doing that hopefully this week at the latest, early next week. So let me speak to the moderate risk scenario, and then perhaps Dr. Hanley, since you're there, you can speak about the remote learning experience in a high risk scenario. So the moderate risk scenario for families is not going to feel much different than what all of our families experienced at the start of the school year. Because in many ways, we were working under that type of umbrella intentionally so that we didn't make too many shifts. The most significant difference in the moderate risk scenario is that our children are hybrid, except on that Wednesday that we brought all of our children back in the low risk scenario, they would be home. On the high risk, in the moderate risk, they would be home accessing remote live learning, but our buildings would be closed for cleaning, unless a teacher needed to access a particular space or something like that. But for the most part, the buildings would be closed so that we could clean, a deep cleaning on that day, and our children would experience their hybrid A/B schedule with that Wednesday having a remote learning experience that would be live, not necessarily asynchronous. There may be small parts of it that would be asynchronous, but for the most part, a live experience. Did I miss anything on that, Liz? And then, okay.
So the teacher, so in that scenario, the teachers would be teaching from home.
They would be teaching from home. So the variability with that would be if for some reason we didn't need to do a deep cleaning on Wednesday in the same kind of way that we anticipated that this past summer. But as of right now, that would likely be the situation. And teachers would be prepared because they would know that on Tuesday, they would need to go home with their materials so that they could live teach.
So can I ask, would it look different? Because it feels like right now, if there's the remote learners, or it's actually the live stream into the classroom, so the classroom is actually going on, and they're just like eyes into the classroom. But if
Yes.
it's a Wednesday from home, that feels more like the tile view.
Yeah, here, yes, that's what it would feel like. It would feel more like I'm directly teaching Karina and Liz and my 20 other children. And for the student experience, my guess would be that that would feel better. And the Wednesday experience and perhaps the eyes in. And the reason that is because it's an equal playing field. They're all seeing, I'm not talking about the physical kids, but for the kids that are live streaming, that Wednesday experience, my guess, is going to feel different, far more direct, far more focused. Because I'm teaching into the same, everybody's in the same position, where I'm not doing this and having to revert, and doing this and having to revert, which is by far the biggest challenge for our classroom teachers. The live streaming experience, the reason that experience was the chosen experience for our students was because students did, in the temporary remote learning option, did have the ability to come back and forth. And that shift back into their social setting with their classroom without having to make adjustments based on pace and other things that might happen from having a different teacher, felt like it was the best experience that we could have provided at the start of school. As I shared, I think at the last meeting, that is not a distance learning experience. It truly just is eyes into the classroom, and if the teacher and our teachers have been able to navigate both populations quite well, hoping to engage both. Sometimes feeling that they're engaging one group more than they're engaging the other, and feeling guilty about that at times. Where that, again, that other experience I have, all of the kids were all together at one time. Very direct, you can bring in your tools and your devices, still share a screen and lots of other things. So that's what that Wednesday would feel like, which is different than the other experience that they're feeling.
Have we taken inventory of teachers' IT requirements for homes? Because I know that students have had issues. We've had issues during our meetings, especially Ken I look like Max Headroom most of the time. We have, third world infrastructure here in Connecticut at times, so are our teachers good?
Generally speaking, we're actually working with the union leadership on what needs they may have. In terms of technology needs, we've taken care of that piece of it.
Right.
In terms
Camera
of,
and computer, great, I'm talking about
in terms of
connectivity.
Wi-Fi capability,
Yeah.
we're also working with our union leadership as part of the negotiation process and where we are in terms of what their needs might be. And for teachers that don't have access or don't have the infrastructure, offering them opportunities to let us know.
Okay.
And also, there are educators that are looking for an alternative space, let's say, on those Wednesdays, or even possibly if we were to go into a high-risk scenario. And so, for example, the library, the public library, or is there a space in the Board of Education offices, or are we able to access our school? Because some people would prefer that. And that's okay. If the space is available and it's safe for them to come into their school, there wouldn't be a reason that they couldn't. Even if schools, quote unquote, are closed, doesn't mean that buildings are closed necessarily. So that's part of the conversations that we're having. In the high-risk scenario, which I spoke about it briefly, but
Yep.
with the
So
Wednesdays.
the high-risk scenario is when our COVID spread is significantly higher. There's a really big distance between starting at a moderate and getting to a high risk. So at the moderate, you're 10 to 25 new cases of COVID a day, and at least the projection is that doesn't happen overnight. That takes weeks really to build, so we probably would see a high risk coming from a long ways away, but a high risk means that all students are learning from home. And like Susie described, as would be in the moderate risk on those Wednesdays, it would be mostly synchronous with bits of asynchronous time. The schedule is what we have predicted, but can't fully know until we get into that situation. And probably that Wednesday in a moderate risk scenario would give us some information about that. We may have to adjust just how long periods are for elementary school students, how much time they need in between sessions, when they need a break, when they don't. The high school probably more realistically can follow the closest to what their schedule looks like now. But that's probably the biggest thing that remains to be seen in a full remote model is how does the period structure actually play out with kids online, on and off all day.
Thank you. Any questions around? Anything else about reopening it? Yep.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is an update on the Winter Garden Ice Arena contract.
Okay, so I'm actually going to start. At our last Board of Education meeting, the Board of Education approved the Winter Garden contract. In fact, I think what was left there was that Ken had asked for some comparables. Do you have those, Dawn? I do. Okay, so we'll pass those around. That said, after that meeting, really because when you brought up that question, Ken, it made us think that we realized that the Winter Garden contract did not go through the typical RFP process this past spring. So if you remember this, well, you may not remember, but this was an agenda item in the spring and it just got bumped due to the nature of COVID and lots of other things. So I would say that that was our mistake, that theoretically that should have gone through either an RFP process or a waiver. So that said, after our review of the policy and the needs of our students, in particular now with COVID, we continue to believe that Winter Garden meets our student athletes' needs and our families' needs best. We looked at the policy, we actually looked at the waiver, and there's a waiver that's part of our RFP policy that someone can request. And so Dane did request a waiver. This was after the fact. I want to be sure that we're transparent, not months ago, but now, after we reviewed the policy, we realized that given the amount of money of the contract, it should have gone through the RFP process. It did not. And so in reviewing that policy, we looked at the waiver, and Jane and I spoke about this and believed that the waiver would make the most sense at this given time. And the reason, there's actually 3 reasons why. And I'll actually identify them, and Dane, if you want to talk to them, I think you could speak to it best, is there's 3 options. There's one, which is that there's only one reasonable or qualified source that can be identified, and we'll talk why we believe that's the case with this particular winter garden and why we believe that's the right choice. Time is a critical factor, and taking the time necessary to comply with the formal process would not be in the best interest of the school district. That's the second reason. And the third one is a cooperative agreement with the local municipality. And again, Dane will walk us through all 3. After he does that, though, I think it's important that we all make a decision. If you would like, you can rescind the vote that approved the winter garden contract, which would then require that we go into an RFP, which could take a number of weeks, or the waiver, from my perspective, based on the reasons that Dane has described to me, would be the best thing to do, given what we know and the needs of our students. However, I do want to make sure that the board knows that they have the option to rescind their vote. We would complete the RFP process, Winter Garden and any other organization that would like to bid could bid, and then we could make a decision thereafter. So why don't you speak to those 3 reasons, and then we can come back and see where the board.
Just from a
Yes.
procedural standpoint, would we have to rescind the contract, vote on approving the waiver, and then reapprove the contract?
The waiver actually is in the regulations, and the superintendent can grant the waiver based on a written request.
Got it.
So
That said, I just wanted to be sure that
Sure.
everybody understood that really it should have gone, the waiver should have come first, and so we missed that part. So I just want to be sure that there's not any miscommunication from now on. Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. So the 3 waivers that we feel apply for this particular contract at this point in time are the ones that Dr. De Silva mentioned. I'll just give a little bit of background and color to each one of them. The first one, and these are at the end of policy R3320. So number 1 was the only one reasonable or qualified source can be identified. Based on our past agreements with the Winter Garden and the current level of service and commitment to supporting our program, they are the only rink that meets 2 criteria. Number 1 being the fact, first and foremost, that they are located in Ridgefield. And secondarily, and I would say equally important when we start talking about cost, is the fact that there are existing bus routes that provide transportation for our athletes if needed. Those are 2 things that no other rink is going to be able to provide. Additionally, while other rinks may be able to provide the following items that I'm going to identify, based on the list of comparables, which I know Dawn will share, and my conversations with rink managers, I expect that the Winter Garden is also the only venue that can offer these 5 things. Number 1 being permanent locker room access and use included in the rink agreement for both the boys and the girls programs. Permanent coach's office included in the rink agreement. Free parking for families when they come to events. Showers connected to the locker room for both genders. And practice times that suit the needs of our coaches and athletes. The comparables, by the way, did show that there are 4 teams in the FCAC within our league that do have a lower hourly rate for ice. Only one of them significantly lower, that is West Hill Stamford, because their rink is owned by the city of Stamford. They pay nothing, at least at the moment. But they also don't get nearly as much ice as we get. But the rest are fairly comparable, and you'll see that when you see the numbers. There are, on the flip side, there are 5 programs within the league that pay more than we do, based on the contract. So we are right in that ballpark. It's not like we are an outlier in those numbers. The second waiver, which I believe would also apply, is that, and especially at this point, is that time is a critical factor, and taking the time necessary to comply with the formal process would not be in the best interest of the school district. Our hockey season is set to begin on November 23rd with practices. Completing a formal RFP process at this point will put us in a significantly challenging spot. Rinks are filling ice already or have sold out for the upcoming season, and especially when we're talking about the amount of ice that we would be looking for. Waiting another 3 or 4 weeks to complete the bid process could leave us without a venue for our program for this coming winter season. And the last waiver piece, which I feel could also apply, is a cooperative agreement with the local municipality. While the Winter Garden is not owned by the town, it's a town business that we've had a long-standing relationship with for many years. The comparables have shown that they are not unreasonable in their rate for ice usage, and when factoring in all the other positive aspects of the agreement, it's clear they're the best option for our programs. Moving our teams out of the Winter Garden would put our kids and families in a significantly more difficult spot during the season and likely would result in our program participation numbers sharply decreasing. So those were the three pieces that I had asked Dr. De Silva to consider in terms of waivers.
Perhaps before we go into discussion, should we hear from Current Element Clause?
I can certainly go over that. On the comparison, there are nine different ice arena areas. Darien Ice House has a rate of $450, school hourly rate, public rate is $625. It does not have locker rooms. Wonderland of Ice is $598 for school hourly rate. Public rate is $650. Girls do not have a locker room, boys do. Sports Center of Connecticut, there's two, there's a St. Joseph and a Trumbull. $540 is the school rate, $625 is the public rate. Yes, they have locker rooms and it costs $8,700 per season. Terry's Corner Ice Rink is owned by the city, does not have a school rate. $485 is the public rate. They do not have locker rooms. Sono Ice House, $575 for the school rate, $600 for public. They do not have locker rooms. Milford Ice Pavilion, $480 is the school rate, $550 for the public. And yes, they have locker rooms, $5,000 for the season. Winter Garden there's a Ridgefield location, which we have been discussing tonight, and also Wilton. $524 is the school hourly rate, and $565 is the Wilton one. The public rate for both is $576, and yes, the price for the locker rooms is included in the price. They have locker rooms and it's included in the price. Danbury Ice Arena does not have a school hourly rate. They are not FCIC home identified. Their public rate is $515, and Brewster Ice Arena is $500. Same thing, they do not have a school hourly rate. Neither one of those has locker rooms.
Just a clarifying point on some of those comparables. All of these rinks have locker rooms. It's the ability that they're going to set them aside for exclusive use by a program during the season. So that's where we see no in most of those cases. The rink itself does have locker rooms, but they're only used on a temporary come in for the day, take your stuff out at the end of the day basis.
On other questions, so on Winter Garden, those locker rooms are permanently for our use?
That's correct.
And they have separate locker rooms for the day use, or how does?
Yes. You're saying the Winter Garden facility itself?
Yeah.
Yes. So there are, I want to say there are 8 locker rooms at the Winter Garden. We have one for our boys program, there's one for our girls program, there's one for Wilton's boys program, one for Wilton's girls program, and then they do have an additional, I want to say it's 4, but it may only be 2, that they use for other customers that come in and out on a daily basis.
With their club teams?
Yeah, whoever else plays out there.
So if this had gone out to a bid process, it doesn't sound like any of the others, if the bid had specified that we need a private locker room for boys, a private locker room for girls, private coach's office, parking for the parents, it doesn't sound like there's anybody else that could have submitted a bid.
I don't know. We didn't complete the process. I would say it's highly unlikely that anyone is going to be able to offer those things to us. And if they did, they're still not in Ridgefield. And that's a really key piece that I know I keep hammering home, but it's an important piece for our families and certainly an important piece for our programs to be connected to the town that they're in. One other thing that I would just mention, the list that Dawn just read through, these are the rinks that are closest to us, and yet none of them are very close. The closest ones are Danbury Ice Arena and Brewster Ice Arena, and for those two in particular, the Danbury Ice Arena, does not have the availability. They don't have any teams skating out of there on a regular basis. The Brewster Ice Arena is located in New York, and so specifically for this year, under our COVID conditions, we're not allowed to do anything out of state for interscholastic athletics. So certainly for this year alone, they're out of the question. But yes, I would say, I don't believe there's another rink who could offer what we have.
So Jonathan, to play off your comment, there's actually the second part of policy 3320 in the regulations. So even if, let's say, we did go out to the bid process and these all came back, the regulation does allow discretion to the board to determine the lowest responsible qualified bidder with considerations beyond just lowest cost, so for exactly the things we're talking about here. And the regulation actually gives some ideas of what that could be. One of them is allows for consideration of prior work performed, so I think Dana's spoken quite eloquently to that. And it also allows us to go local if, if there's a pretty equal bid out there. And I think we just actually saw something similar, although they're not under our policy, but the Board of Selectmen just recently, chose not the lowest cost, but for buying a police cruiser, they actually went with someone because they were local and they wanted to support that local business, especially during a time like this. So I thought I would, there's also discretion to the board on that.
I think another important piece, having been to most of these ice arenas, that other than Brewster and Darien, those are considerable distance away, some of them over an hour going highways during rush hours and whatever else. And I think a big thing is supporting a local business at this time. I think that really, as a member of the Ridgefield community too, I think that is very important to me.
Other comments or thoughts?
Since I voted against it, we didn't go through the proper process here. So a go-between the three, we're talking about $500,000 without bid and competition. Is it really in the spirit of our fiscal responsibility? Would it be possible to have a 1-year contract and then do the process appropriately, know what ice time is available? Because secondary to all of this locker room, they need locker rooms because their practices are at 5 a.m. They can't bring these bags to school. Hockey families travel all the time. There isn't a family with a hockey player that doesn't travel hours every weekend. Does anyone have any response to that? Is that a possibility for us to limit the amount of years we're in this contract? It is too late, as a hockey parent, it is too late to find other ice time. I understand that, but to put $500,000 and be locked into a contract without competition doesn't seem responsible, and it's against our policy.
The closest rink that you listed off was probably Wilton, which is an hour round trip for any of our kids. So no matter what we do, we're putting an undue burden on any, I don't have a hockey kid, I don't even fathom what they go through, but there's no bus routes, so everybody has to arrange transportation. These are burdens that I don't think hockey families already spend a lot of money would want to go through. We've got a good local player who has, in good faith, worked with us for how many years, Dave, now?
I can say that this is minimally the third time we were looking to renew the policy with them, so it's minimum the past 10 years.
Okay.
But I believe it was even longer than that.
But there are no comparables. That's obviously clear between not just locker rooms, but location. There are no comparables, unless somebody's put up a rink I don't know about. So I don't see any reason to deviate at this point.
And I would just like to concur with Mr. McAvoy, a good community partner locally. I'm not a hockey parent either, but I know that it's an optional sport, and hockey parents and other sports parents always travel. We have a strong partnership with the Winter Garden. They are community members. They do a ton for Ridgefield. There is no comparables from a process perspective. Typically, when you run an RFI or RFP, you say, what are the boundaries here? And it sounds like we've gone through that process and found it lacking in terms of competitive equivalence. And given our partnership and relationship with them and that factor, it makes sense to support this agreement.
Respectfully, the process wasn't gone through. This is asking for a waiver now because we didn't get bids. It did not go out for bids. So just to correct the facts, that is the fact.
Who else are we going to bid it against? That's a Ridgefield taxpayer community partner.
Dan Murray has a partial owner that's a Ridgefield resident.
I think that the two things are not mutually exclusive, just I think it's already been given that the process was not followed. I think what we're talking about tonight is had the process been followed, we would be at the same place that we are now.
That's correct, yes, yes.
So the process was not followed, that's a given, and I think we accepted that, and that's been discussed. So, I mean, I think if we would have ended up at the same place, I don't see the harm in being where we are.
Well, I do see Karina's point in terms of the process wasn't followed. What harm would come in terms of, if we come to the same process next year and we go through the process, would we lose our ability to get what we have now? And that's.
But to what end?
Yeah.
Are we expecting a new rink to be built here where we're gonna have buses in the next year?
No, I'm just saying if we want to make sure that we've crossed every T and dotted every I.
They did the waiver, we're
Yeah,
done.
so I just feel like I just want to clarify one piece, and it's what you brought up, Ken, is that what we should have done was 4 weeks ago or 5 weeks ago when we were talking about Winter Garden, is that Dane should have done exactly what he did now, submitted a waiver to me. I would have come to the board and said, so you know, we're not requesting bids because Dane has requested a waiver on for the following reasons. And so therefore, in some ways, we would have ended up exactly where we are now. In the interest of transparency, we felt it was important that we offered the Board of Education an opportunity to take a step back and say, we voted on this not realizing this, so therefore, if we need to go to an RFP, we will absolutely do that. But in reality, Dane would have asked for a waiver, I would have come to the board and said, it makes perfect sense, given the facts that he's just described, to request the waiver on behalf of what meets the needs of our kids and families.
And so the PAMI example with the police cruiser, I think was a difference of $187 at the end of the contract. Dane, the hourly rate between Winter Garden and the only ones that could be rational, let's say Danbury is what? And at the 500 something per hour, it's 900 hours?
Well, I don't want to interrupt, but.
And we're talking about not a lot of money.
I do want to interrupt. But I mean, I think the way that the process would have worked is Dane would have asked Dr. De Silva for the waiver, she would have granted the waiver, and then we would be here.
Right.
So I don't think we need to discuss the comparables, I don't think the third one, personally, that's a tenuous one, but I think the most important one is the reasonable source. And I think the reasons you gave for the third one actually apply to reasonable source, so just technical. And I think just even if the waiver was granted just for that first rationale, I think that would have been granted. We can't we don't have to approve the waiver.
We don't approve the waiver, we would just have the right to approve the contract itself.
Right.
Reasonable, yeah.
So the waiver for the process, that this is the contract that would have made it to us, and we would vote on that. So, yeah, I think that's where we are.
How we define qualified bidder really matters here. We could be saying that if we determine that qualified bidder means bidder that is in town, then there isn't another party that can be party to a bid process. However, a bid process, we wouldn't be comparing the 524 to the 515. We'd be comparing the sealed number to the sealed number, and they could be different. And that's to Karina's point of potentially these numbers could be different if we did 1 year now and looked at it again a year later. However, if we are going to define qualified bidder as bidder in town, then it's moot.
Well, from a procedural perspective, it's moot anyway if Dr. De Silva granted the waiver.
Any other board questions or comments? I'm not seeing anybody requesting. If we were to do a rescission, it would require 2/3 of the board to vote on having a vote to rescind. So I don't know that I've necessarily heard that around the table.
Do we have to call the vote to see?
We don't technically have to call a
Okay.
vote, no. Yeah, no, but anyone can feel free to.
I can't hear you, Margaret.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was saying that if we were, if someone wanted to make a motion to rescind, it would require 2/3 of a vote of those members present and voting. But I don't see necessarily in the room that anybody is making that, or that there's 2/3 support for that. Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on the agenda. First read of policies. Karina, if you'd like to take us through these since they were discussed in the policy meetings this week?
Sure thing. The first one here is the COVID policy use, 19 policy, use of face coverings in schools. And in our meeting, we had a lengthy discussion with Erin Cook, one of our nurses, our committee and administrators. And we discussed this policy. He answered a lot of questions for us, and we were comfortable with this policy as you see it in front of you, if anyone has questions or comments.
And again, this is just a first read, so there's no vote being taken tonight.
There was also optional language in the model policies we chose to put in this policy. And at the end, we also, because the discipline policy was referenced, we put the reference right there in case a family wanted to look it up themselves. So it would be easy and accessible for them. Any comments on this one?
Well, I guess, the only thing, I understand completely why they're saying that the certain kind of face coverings are not allowed, such as neck gaiters, bandanas, or valve masks with valves. I mean, I just worry about, once a child's in the school, who's going to monitor that? Is that, that becomes tricky.
It does, and that's where that discipline piece
Yeah.
is important. I will say this, ultimately, we haven't had that issue, thankfully, and I think that's because our school-based administrators have communicated well with families, as has Erin, as has the reopening committee. However, it is policed at the school level, there's no doubt. And so reminders, calls home, all of the progressive types of steps that schools would take if needed. Thankfully,
Yeah, I mean, I see that more with the older kids. The little kids come with what they come with. So.
The only question I have on it is it talks about school-sponsored activities outside of school buildings. It doesn't exclude the home. So I've seen some headlines for certain things in government agencies where people at home were being asked to wear masks, and I know that we all logically assume that that's not included, but I would recommend that we add that language that individuals that are remote learning is not covered under this because it makes no sense to do so.
Yep, good point.
The policy itself says in school.
It also says school-sponsored activities. By the home, if I'm reading it correctly. Let me double check. It says,
Liz, what paragraph?
Third paragraph.
Okay.
Third paragraph, second line.
all individuals participating in or attending school-sponsored activities must wear appropriate face coverings, whether or not those activities are legal.
Dr. De Silva, do we want to ask?
So I'm just wondering if we can put in some type of, we can certainly ask the attorney, but I'm just wondering if we can put in an exclusion in there to where Liz is, so in that third paragraph, if we put in parentheses.
Remote learners at home,
So,
basically.
right.
Well, would that fall under, it's not worded this way currently, but would that fall under unless an applicable exception applies? Which would be at home is an applicable exception,
Right.
so in which case it wouldn't need to be added, because that
Except
language is
clarity,
there.
because people don't want to constantly police language and adjudicate it.
Which is fair.
Yeah.
Well, I think is that the question then, Liz? Do you think that language, it's understood within that language that Ken just brought up, where it says unless an applicable exception applies, which would be your remote learning, you're not gonna have your mask on?
I don't know what applicable exceptions are, so I'm just making sure that we're not getting over our skis if you get an overzealous implementer. We have to think about policies outside of this room and think out people who have no context would interpret them, right? And I just want to make sure private residences are excluded from any one of our policies in terms of what someone wears outside of anything offensive, of course, but.
Well, for that.
What if we put in the word, Liz, because all individuals participating in or attending any school-sponsored activities, what if it was physical, in-school physical activities?
Yeah, I think
Just
that's.
to make it clearer that that's all we're talking about.
Well,
Yeah, it's the line that says whether or not those activities occur in a school, building, district facility, or district vehicle. That essentially opens it up to every single place, including the home. So I would just say, maybe it's private residences or virtual learning is clearly excluded from this, something along those lines.
And just, if we put any in-person school-sponsored activities.
I think then you're limiting yourself to athletic events, for example. So if the school.
But some of the athletes are not required to wear masks depending on where
Right,
they
but-
are and what their social distancing is, and
Right,
the
but if-
parents could be social distanced in the bleachers. I don't know that this applies to anything but the students.
Well, since all individuals attending any school-sponsored activities, I think that would encompass non-students. I think that's the point of that particular language. I think that's the point of that particular language, is to include non-students, individuals attending.
I know, but I don't know what's going on in all the facilities. The way I'm reading this is face coverings in school. I don't know if parents are at a baseball game outside 20 feet from another parent or by their car, if we're saying they have to wear a mask then. I'm not reading that this way, so maybe we have more questions for the attorneys, because
Well, see, I would think that would be an applicable exception.
I agree. I don't think you can outline every single
You
one.
can't, no.
And I think they evolve, that's the other piece, is that they're evolving all the time.
So I wonder if it is worth going back to the attorneys, letting them know of the concern, which I think is a valid one, regarding the remote learners and how to make sure that this could not be applied to that situation necessarily. And perhaps they have some suggested language that isn't too broad, that then starts to get into other areas that we don't want it to.
I think the clearest way to cover that exclusion for in-home remote learning is to call it out specifically.
Just
Yeah.
say what it is.
Yeah.
The other thing missing is there's absolutely no timeline on this. It appears to be in perpetuity, we'll be wearing masks forever and ever and ever and ever.
This is part of the
Part of the
COVID packet
I
that
get it.
sunsets on June 30th.
Okay,
They just sent it to us later, so unfortunately they
Okay.
didn't give it to us in that original packet, so this one will go along with the
so the school year.
Series
okay.
C-19, yeah, that sunsets. The other change that we made in the policy committee is we changed in the last paragraph to the preposition, we did in and on district facilities and district, not just in the school buildings, and on, in and on school buildings, district facilities, and district transportation. Do you remember that shift? So we'll make that change as well.
Oh, because it's not, I don't see it
It's in the last paragraph, right, it's
Right.
missing
Okay.
the word, the preposition, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, if we are gonna put additional rules in, I guess that would defeat the purpose of having the policy, because the policy would just be overwritten by whatever rules were applied, so I do think that probably needs clarification as well.
Any other
So
questions?
just clarifying the questions, so there's an on-school grounds question which did come up in our committee, and adding language to make it clear that we're talking about in-person sponsored activities. Are the other question that's being asked about other school-sponsored activities that are outdoors, Liz, if I'm just understanding you, that could come up too, that are on the school grounds? Besides just the remote.
District sponsored, right? If somebody's you actually added to the point of, if somebody's at an event that has different rules because it's at a different district, but it's still district sponsored, we don't have jurisdiction over that, right? They set their rules.
Right.
Our people should follow their rules at their location, whatever they may be. And then the other question I had was actually on the last paragraph around, the administration can add whatever rules they want. I think that's a little too broad-ended and should be limited by whatever health notifications come out or something. Otherwise, the policy itself could be overridden in a minute, so there's no point in the policy. So I think it's just too broad-ended.
Well, whatever rules, just according to the language, whatever rules they develop have to be within the policy.
Right.
And that's what that first sentence says. They can't write a rule that overrides this policy. The rule has to be within the policy.
And the last line actually refutes that and says the district facilities may identify additional rules as related to the safe operation, which essentially is in conflict with what you just said, and could identify those rules. It doesn't say they have to be within any kind of guidelines. It's completely open-ended. And the other concern I have with it is, in accordance with applicable laws, I just want to be clear in this dialogue that would include any medical exceptions that people would have for masks for students that have those medical exceptions and for participants or otherwise. I know that's part of the policy is etiquette, but I don't know how that applies here if that was discussed at committee.
It says, unless an applicable exception applies. I read that as a medical exception, but I wouldn't want to limit it to just a medical exception. I don't know if there's other.
Disability based.
Yes, there could be a student with a disability that therefore would have an exception. Can I just?
Or spectator, or visitor, or anything, teacher.
This last paragraph also does give you the
Yeah.
ability to, by regulation, cover the remote learners.
So my point was that the additional face covering rules as related to the safe operation of the school community, that is the natural operational obligation of the superintendent and his or her designee. So I'm not sure how much more limited we would want to get, because otherwise we'd be back here.
Right.
Every time we made a shift in a rule based on what we believe is safe, we make those decisions now. Whether it's, students walking 8 feet apart on the school bus, even though maybe they only had to walk 6 feet, we believe it's safer, let's just say, if they walked 8 feet. So those are the types of rules that do happen operationally. So that's one piece. And then I'm not sure, Liz, I had to ask you to clarify the question about the public, let's say not wearing a face mask, or that last piece, Liz, that you brought up.
Well, let me just respond to your first comment. I don't think it's a bad thing to come here in a pandemic and say you want to change the rules around what's needed for a safe operation of the school. So first and foremost, I think that is actually preferable given the unprecedented times. And should the conditions change that much, it's probably likely that we should call a special meeting. So just in contrast to your comment there. And then the second comment, when you asking about the comment I made about all individuals participating in or attending any school-sponsored activities must wear an appropriate face covering. That was my question around participants or otherwise, that, there are rules in Connecticut around medical exceptions, or there could be off-location activities that have different rules because they're a different district. Whether those are more or less specific, I don't know, but I think if you're going to write a policy, it has to be pretty clear that you would follow, I would assume, wherever you were participating, and that we would also make sure that there was appropriate exceptions being followed. We see the headlines where some of these things are being taken off off of their intended purpose, so I just want to make sure our policy covers those from being an issue.
This is a policy that's coming from the state, right?
This is
Connecticut State, and we're only playing in Connecticut State schools. So my understanding would be all of them would be working on this same policy, right?
Not every school district has to adopt
Okay.
the same policy.
Okay, got it. I was thinking they were all bound by
So
this.
this is pretty much all, from what I've seen from our CAVE chair list, is most districts are adopting a mask policy, whether that policy comes from CAVE or whether it comes from Shipman and Goodman like ours or their
Right.
own other council. There is some form of a mask policy, but the wording might be slightly
Differ.
But it is, you're exactly right, it's based on Connecticut law.
Would wording that included communication timeline make sense then, Liz? As far as, if something has to be decided, and the medical expert has contacted all districts, this is what we need to do. I wouldn't want to stymie the implementation of something, but we would want to be communicated with.
Well, that would fall under the applicable laws, rules, regulations, or board policies, so I'm not sure it would apply. I don't know, I mean, I'm not interpreting your question correctly.
I'm saying, wouldn't it be fair, the superintendent is handling the operations of the district. She doesn't run by us other safety matters. She or he wouldn't. If there's a safety issue in a school and a school needs to be evacuated, she doesn't call a board meeting.
Yeah, but I don't think the application of additional face covering rules would fall under that. Saying, that's a false equivalency.
200,000 people are dead. So I feel like this is a major issue, and if she has to make any, for human beings, for our world, people are dying. So if she has to make a decision, I don't think she needs to run it by a bunch of non-medical professionals at any point. I think she's getting information from the experts.
I hear you. And as a Board of Ed, we set policy, and I'm giving you feedback on the policy that it's too broad, and that if there are additional face covering regulations, my recommendation is that it's very clear in the policy that that's a change of the policy. Because right now the policy is basically negated by the last line, because it's too broad. The dramatic
policy is about face coverings.
are irrelevant to the policy conversation that we're currently having.
It's a COVID-19 policy. It's a COVID-19 policy.
Okay.
It says it right here. This is in a COVID-19 packet, but it has nothing to do with it. We're wearing face coverings for fun. Face coverings, that's what the policy's about. It gives her authority to make those decisions. I'm asking if we should have something in policy that says that we are communicated with in a time frame.
And I've answered that in your inquiry that I don't think that's sufficient. You can yell at me all you want and be dramatic about it, but I still don't agree. I still agree that the last line is open-ended and should be clarified, that the policy has been set, and if it needs to change, it will either be based on applicable laws and rules and regulations as stated in paragraph 2, or that line should be removed. That is the role of the board to set policies. I am telling you that I don't agree with the way the policy can be written.
Okay.
So you can yell and scream and...
Nobody's yelling and screaming.
Okay, I think.
And you can smile and be condescending all you want. I
Point of
will
order,
on this
please.
board.
Point of order, thank you,
Then why do you care?
thank you.
I actually care about people. I care that this is a COVID-19 policy.
Excuse me,
Are you suggesting I don't care about people because I'm actually debating a policy that you wrote in the policy committee? Is that
excuse
what you're
me,
suggesting, ma'am?
excuse me. We're
I'm
gonna
not suggesting anything that you're doing. I would never suggest anything you're doing. I was asking if there was a way we could put in policy communicating. I'm fine with the way the policy.
excuse me, might I suggest that, I think we've heard what some of the concerns are. I think that we can, consult with our attorneys. I think we can also look to get other sample mask policies. Like I mentioned, some other places have devised them, perhaps CAVES. We can see how that has been worded. And then the policy committee can re-meet to discuss some of this, and then it will come back before the board. But I think we've heard what the concerns are. Go ahead, Ken.
Just along with some of these, would it be beneficial to have maybe a paragraph, footnote, however the better way to say an example of applicable exception could be special needs, medical, any in school or at-home learning, and that way that's just covered. It's a paragraph.
I think that's. covered.
Includes but is not limited to these three things that we've talked about tonight, or anything else that comes up in
Except
policy.
that if you start enumerating them, you may miss one.
Limit, include, but not limited to.
Oh, okay.
Well, because if somebody asks about one of these three things, because yes, you can't give an exhaustive list, but in the same time, you want to be able to give examples, because if somebody asks, you know, if I'm in home learning, that's a school-sponsored activity, do I have to wear a mask?
I think it's covered by the regulation piece that's in the superintendent's hands, but if it makes it clear, if people look to the policy before they look to the reg, then certainly, as long as it's not limited to.
Right, exactly.
Margaret, I would say, take it back to the good midshipmen. I mean, that's what their job is, to wordsmith and to look for inconsistencies in language.
Right, we can relay what the concerns are.
This is a first read, right?
Just the first one, absolutely, yeah.
There's issues, take it back, come back.
Exactly,
Exactly,
that's exactly.
Just the one last piece on the second to last line, and just because I don't know that this is gonna change, is right now, the district facilities and district transportation vehicles and may identify additional face covering rules. Those rules are coming right now from the Department of Public Health, the State Department of Education, and then we meet and make that adjustment, as I mentioned earlier in my reopening update, is that those adjustments are made based on that feedback, right? So we're not sitting here as a collective unit saying, we're gonna make decisions around mask coverings that aren't recommended by those groups, and then we're making that adjustment or those revisions right on that reopening plan and under the health and safety protocols, based on the feedback that we're receiving, which does change. It changes frequently, so certainly an update can happen in lots of different ways, but that information is coming from those organizations as well.
Okay, let's move on to the next policy, which was 3542.
This policy was the Code of Conduct Nutrition Policy. It reads, if you look through it, more like a conflict of interest policy. And what we did, we were toying around with a couple of things of whether to make an A or a B, and we decided to put all of the language into this one policy that's now in front of you.
Is the red the new?
Yes.
Any questions or comments from anyone? I assume you had a chance to look. Okay. Yeah, as Karina said, we basically took that language and added it to our existing policy. So that I guess, this again was one of those ones that was recommended, Shipman had recommended to us that we update this policy. So it's one of those ones that needed to be done.
Hasn't been touched in a while.
Right. Yeah. Okay, on to the next.
The next policy is policy 4118.231, alcohol, tobacco, and a drug-free workplace. We had a lot of lengthy discussion about this one. We asked for some clarification, and Dr. De Silva as the legal team came back to us with, and now this is your first read of this policy.
There had not been something that this is replacing? Is this brand new?
No, it's a replacement.
It's a replacement, right? Because it seems so much of it is, should have been, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I was focusing on the electronic cigarettes. Bringing that into the fold.
And maybe on the medical.
Yep.
Any questions or comments on this one? No?
What were the main changes? Was it the e-cigarette is the primary change?
Yes.
Yes.
And then the marijuana use for palliative care.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In the third paragraph.
yeah, the medical. No, I read it too.
Okay. Karina, I think we can move on to the last one now, food allergies.
The last one is the food allergies and glycogen storage disease policy 5141.25. We changed, again, Mr. Aaron Cook, the nurse, our committee, and administrators discussed this one at length. The only thing we removed language from this policy is there was a piece where it said, essentially anyone who had an allergy are virtually always students with disabilities, and we removed that language.
And the reason that language was originally there was to really push schools to be sure that they were referring to the 5014, but we felt like the language was strong enough that they should be referred to the 5014 without saying that virtually always a child is disabled.
And Erin, I think you shared with us in the policy committee meeting that this policy is really needed, and basically it's already implemented in practice. So this is just putting into policy what we
Correct,
do.
yeah, we've already implemented all of the practices outlined in the policy. Changes, this is a result of the law that was passed about 4 years ago, but it's just catching up with that.
Any questions or comments from members of the board?
The only question I have in here, and I'm just reading through it again to see if I missed it, is there anything in here around confidentiality for the data that we have associated to the student for their health records and ensuring that that is kept as confidential as possible given the rest of the policy? And the intent of my question is really around making sure kids especially don't feel isolated or picked on because they have some life-threatening allergy, everyone in the class suddenly knows they have a condition or whatever, and that will be treated as proprietary health information.
I don't think there's anything in the policy itself. Erin, do you want to talk about confidentiality?
Yeah, I mean, we apply the confidentiality standard of FERPA, which is more strict than HIPAA, which nurses are more familiar with, to all of our practices. So we just always assume that there's no reason to alert anyone in the building to a student's life-threatening allergy unless there's an educational purpose for the person needing to have that information. In the case of teachers, of course, we do alert them to emergency care plans and students in their classrooms so that they can be prepared to care for that student appropriately if the need would arise. Like Dr. De Silva said, I don't think it's specifically mentioned in this draft policy, but that's our general practice, is to follow the law in all circumstances.
But is there a policy that says that we need to do that?
But it's
Is there a policy that says we follow FERPA, for example?
a policy that says, I'm sorry,
That we
that we
follow FERPA in all of our,
Yeah, we can search the policy manual, I'm not sure.
I just wasn't sure if that would be like an overriding policy that would apply to all policies.
I mean, it's something that we're all trained in, is
Right.
the FERPA requirements, we're all aware of it and trained in it, and we talk about it all the time, it's very cautious with confidentiality.
And I think to Liz's point, is it in writing anywhere?
Correct, yeah, I mean, we'd have to research the policy database to see specifically, but one would imagine that there probably is a policy.
I would think, so I mean, if there was, then I don't, otherwise, every policy that we have like this, we would have to add that additional language.
Well, I also think the 504 section
Right, exactly.
necessarily
Yeah,
needs FERPA, you know?
I mean, this
It
is.
has its own governance.
Yeah, all of the confidentiality, it's enshrined in educational law, and I'm not
Okay.
sure, Dr. De Silva, if we need to have a specific policy for that, or,
I'm going to see whether or not we do,
yeah.
but ultimately, yeah, it's exactly.
We do have a policy around students' health and medical records, policy 5125.11,
Yeah.
that speak to having to comply with all HIPAA standards.
Yeah, it's called health and medical records.
Yeah,
The question I have on that, Liz, and it might be, or Dr. Henry, excuse me, that might be a little bit different here is when you think about food and parties and class and things
Yeah.
like that, where there may be some, and I apologize, I can't hear the back of the room at all, the audio is really goofy, so my apologies if I restate something you guys already said. It's just, I would you know, there may be a little bit of a different standard of care here in terms of letting people that are impacting in the classroom, volunteering in the classroom know about this versus others. So just a thought there in terms of how to address that.
Yeah, I think it has to do with access, because if part of the educational experience is whatever event is happening, and there's an allergy within the student group, in order to allow that child access, you do have to provide some limitations to the group around whatever allergen is gonna come into the space, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't identify who the student is. You know, in some cases, especially elementary classes, over years, parents self-disclose, but the right to access has to be balanced with that privacy piece, because you then deny their equal access like everybody else.
So they still allow food to be brought in from the outside into classrooms in this day and age of food allergies?
Do you mean for parties?
Yeah.
For events, for school,
events.
so there are events that take place in school that aren't always parties, for educational reasons that may include food.
Okay.
The school nurse is always part of that
Okay.
conversation, as they're aware of who has everything within the school. Yeah.
Just grammatically, on page 1 of the allergy, I think the word should not be struck. Should be included. This,
Oh, right.
Oh,
Yeah, it doesn't make sense otherwise.
yeah.
Along with too far.
Yeah.
Any other comments or board discussion around that last policy? Thank you. All right, moving on to our next agenda item, which is election of an interim board secretary. So as we mentioned, tonight is Karina's last meeting, and her last day as a board member is tomorrow. That will leave a vacancy on the board in the position of secretary. Again, Karina, thank you for holding that position this past year. So under policy 9120, when the officer election is under open election, and it's done by majority vote, so there's not a motion, it's just you get to take nominations from the floor. And again, the vote on that is by majority vote by hand. So I will start. I actually have a nomination. I would like to nominate Rachel Ruggieri for secretary. Since day one, Rachel, you've been a valued member of the board, and over the last 10 months, you've grown even more valuable in our collective decision-making. You dive deeply into the work, you research and understand issues and topics in front of you, as well as the governance role of the board. You're thoughtful and willing to do the due diligence to gauge the sentiments of the community. You always keep students and staff at the forefront of your decision-making. In addition, I learned from your perspective as a teacher, as a math teacher, and as a parent of elementary-age children. You bring so many things to the table, and I think you make a wonderful officer as board secretary. So I'd like to nominate Rachel.
Second.
I don't know if there's any other comments or if there's any other nominations. All right, great. Well, we can move to a vote then. So like I said, this is just a hands vote. All those in favor of Rachel as board secretary, please raise your hand.
Did we ask Rachel if she wanted to be?
Oh, yeah. That isn't in the policy.
That's, I didn't see that in the policy.
Take one step back.
So we didn't see that.
I didn't see her raise her
Right.
hand, so
Right.
I got a little worried.
Exactly. All right, well, congratulations, Rachel.
Margaret, I'm very humbled by your nomination. I'd just like to thank my fellow board members too for your support. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, get ready on that email.
Call it any of us who-
Thank you.
for support, because I remember that's so important
Yes.
when you started, anybody.
All right, on to the next agenda item, which is the fiscal year 2019-20 year-end update. This is actually not a vote, this is just an update. If the board remembers back on August 10th, we approved the end-of-year financials. So this is, typically we get an update after some of those encumbrances have been closed.
And especially during COVID, when we are looking to see what our carry forward is going to be that go into the reserve account. As of June 30th, 2020, I reported that we had expended or obligated $96,778,441 of our $98 million appropriated budget. Since that time, we have completed our year-end reconciliations and our final work. Actual spend was $95,350,022. Still encumbered is $1,088,196. That gives us an unspent balance as of August 28th of $1,755,542. The date is important is in that each week we have accounts payable that we process, and in the accounts payable we have prior year expenses that's encumbered that will close and be completed. Therefore, still encumbered would go down and unspent would go up. The town is looking to use $1,122,000 of our $1,122,000 of our unspent funds. Per the agreement on August 18, 2020, the Board of Finance town meeting, a reserve was agreed upon for carry forward of the difference between our $1,775,542 and the $1,122,000, which is $633,542 at the time of this report, by the Ridgefield Public Schools to use for unbudgeted COVID-19 expenditures only. In order to get the staff back to the buildings, and after the executive order to close the district, we spent $251,437 of our unbudgeted expenditures to get sanitizing supplies, PPEs, and plexiglass for the buildings in order to bring the staff back safely. All of that money has been turned over to the town. All the invoices for that has been turned over to the town for their first submission of the FEMA reimbursement. Since July 1st, which is what I report to you on my financials, the district has spent $890,736 in unbudgeted COVID-19 purchases to open the schools safely. As an offset to the unbudgeted expenditures, we have received state notification of 2 COVID relief grants. The first grant that we had received notice of, the ESS-ERF, we received an approval for $87,842 to use and $6,612 for nonprofit schools that are located here in Ridgefield. This grant was applied for and approved for us to use distance learning expenditures as well as purchase services, of which are not included in the $890,736 that I had mentioned earlier. It's not mentioned, it's not located in those numbers because we knew ahead of time that we were going to be needing certain distance learning and purchase services in order to open the schools. In addition to that, COVID relief funds in the amount of $106,378 has been offered to the town of Ridgefield, the Ridgefield School District, but we are still working out the process in order to apply for and receive those funds. They have not been received yet, but we are in the process of applying for them. So those two numbers, the $87,842 and $106,378, can help reduce the amount of unspent COVID expenditures that we have incurred. In addition to that state funds, we are looking at other areas within our budget that we can use to help cover the unbudgeted expenditures at this time. Any questions?
Any questions or comments? Go
I
ahead.
just had a question, just procedurally, because the budget process was a little different this year than it is in prior years, has been. So the town in a year over, well, 2 years ago now, I guess, approved the $98 million budget for the school district. And they voted on that. The town voted on the budget. At that time, is the town made aware that any balances left, any unencumbered funds left over are returned back to the town? Or is the expectation of the town that the $98 million will be spent on education?
I'm not sure. If I could try to answer, I think I
Okay.
know what you're asking. At the end of any fiscal year, we do our final review and our final closeout, and we know where we kind of stand. We also have our encumbrances that we carry forward. The town does know, we do an encumbrance report for the audit, and they do know what has been closed out in the year and what is still available and open
Right.
for use. One of the guidance that we have received by the town is that if we have funds left over, to use it for our facilities and infrastructure, and that's something that we try to always do. This past year, with the buildings being closed, not being able to get in, it's been a little bit different. Last year, we did very well in using up the funds that were appropriated for education, and we were able to, I think we ended the year with like $250,000 that was unspent. We did have some encumbrances, and we worked through those encumbrances throughout the year. But at the end of every year, we do true all that up with the town, and they're aware of it.
But the public, when they vote on, it's like if I was a member of the public and I said, okay, I want $98 million to be spent on education, and that's my expectation, and part of the reason why I'm asking is during the finance meeting, there seemed to be this expectation from the town that they were expecting money from the Board of Education in order to offset shortfalls in their budget, or to allow them to have a smaller budget to reduce the mill rate or keep it steady, or
I don't want to speak
for
for
their
the
needs.
town and what was going on with there, but what I think that conversation was is they felt that there was a shortfall within their budget due to COVID, with the revenues that were coming in, and they knew that we had an unspent due to COVID, with the buildings being closed for the last quarter of the school, and they knew we'd had funds left over, so I think they were anticipating the funds that we would have in order to help balance their budget.
Right. Well, so this is strictly procedural. I mean, obviously, yes, all those public meetings, and the public was aware of all these discussions. But the vote, is there anything in the vote? So I wasn't here for that vote. What is there the expectation? Is the public aware of the expectation that unspent, unencumbered funds are going to be returned to the town? I mean, where I'm going with this is, so we were allowed to keep a portion of that, so $633,000, which we have already expended. So now we're going to have to go back to the town and get the money that was already allocated to the schools back from the town. It seems like overly complicated.
I agree.
So in other words, what
So-
you're saying is, let's say, and I'm just gonna do simple math here, because I
Sure.
know, but, so let's say it's 98 million that we get, but we only spent 97 million. So at the end of the year, there is $1 million. So what happens to that $1 million? Should it stay with the town and not be expended on educational funds, even though the taxpayers in Ridgefield, when they voted to approve the educational budget, approved 98 million for the schools?
Yes.
Even though we only spent 97 million. So that million, does it go back to the town, and then does the taxpayer, they had approved the 98 million, is that okay by them, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, yes.
Or should perhaps that million stay in some kind of a fund that will fund education, because again, that's why the 98 million was.
Every year,
Something
when we have
like
budget
that.
discussions, the 1 year I've been in budget discussion, one of the big things we talked about is facilities, where we
Yes.
keep kicking projects down the road.
Yeah.
And I think, absent COVID, we'll take that out, this $1 million could have applied to some of those. And when the public is approving that budget, these are all the things that they're thinking about. So it was, honestly, at this point, it was more of a communication issue. Does the town know that all of this money may not be spent by? So it was more of that, like how was the wording, how was it worded and all that. So it was more of a policy thing. I think that's an important thing, because there is that expectation that they're going to spend this much on education.
Right, and with that, when we create our budget is line item budget.
Mhm.
It's very specific, and the funds are used specifically for the schools, for salaries, for benefits, for transportation, for contractual obligations that we have. And it is our goal and our anticipation to spend all of the funds that are given to us. Certain circumstances happen where sometimes that doesn't happen. And there are some funds that are freed up. We may overestimate the budget on utilities.
Sure.
And they may come in under, and therefore we have a little bit of funds left.
Right, which we would then transfer, which we'll get into later, which we then transfer to an infrastructure project or something else that
Cover something else.
we've been
right?
delaying because we didn't have.
The funds for it.
So in a normal year, we would do our best to use the vast majority of our budget before the end of the year. There's always gonna be some left over, because you can never go
Can't
over.
never-
Can't go a dollar over, so
Right.
it's gonna be a dollar over. This year, going into the budgets, going into February, going into March, the town was looking to us to see how much they could reduce the tax increase to an uncomfortable population, not knowing what was gonna go on with the jobs.
Of course.
And so the $1 million that we sent back, we can also think of that as being part of what was used to fund this year's budget.
Sure. And then, so we'll get down to that, is how are we gonna get this additional money that now we have to go back to them and ask for? It was more of a process. I mean, yeah, everything was discussed in public and everybody, was part of those conversations. The transparency was there. I think.
It was a very
Yes.
non-normal year.
Unprecedented.
Unprecedented.
Any other questions or comments on the year-end update? Dawn, if we want to move on to the 2019, 2020 transfers, and this, you can walk us through it, but this one will be a motion, right? We do need to
Yes,
approve these.
both transfers, please. Before you is the final transfers for the entire budget for the 2019-20 school year. What you see is the top 20 largest transfers of where we've moved money from and to. They do not go one-to-one. It is not a one-to-one on either side. It's just the top 20 debits and the top 20 credits, and then the balance are very small but numerous accounts underneath that. Most of the, I could say the categories, most of the transfers were special education, facilities, legal, and some of the vacation payout.
And most of these savings look like they came from being closed the last quarter of the year, if I
Correct.
inferred correctly.
Correct. Some health benefits, the excess cost reimbursement, we received more than what we had anticipated. Building security, there was a little savings there. Custodian overtime, there was some savings. Payroll FICA, yes,
And then the other side of that story is, and then there were some,
additional expense.
the additional expenses in the categories on the right column.
Correct.
Basically unanticipated in some ways.
Yeah.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the transfers for fiscal year 2019-20 as presented on September 29, 2020?
I so move.
Okay. Ken, do I have a second? Kathleen? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, that looks like unanimous, thank you. All right, moving on to the next item, which is fiscal year 2020, 2021 transfers.
There are a few transfers that have occurred or been requested to occur this year so far. Special education has requested $228,247 to move from their tuition Connecticut private to their tuition Connecticut public schools. This is due to more students entering the public outplacement than private. The high school asked to have $1,500 moved from their world language transportation to $1,000 of that to their instructional materials world language, and $500 of it to membership for language. And that's due to that they don't feel that they were needing the transportation budget due to lack of transportation during this time. And they needed it for more instructional materials and proficiency student activities. And then at East Ridge Middle School, they had 2 requests. One was for music and jazz accompanists of $1,200. They were asking to move from that line to the local mileage administration line. They felt that the $1,200 from the jazz accompanists wasn't necessarily needed at this time, as no live music would be performed this year, and the funds were needed to cover staff transportation between schools. And the last one that they requested for East Ridge was student productions, $1,500, a reduction from that line, and an increase in the instructional materials art of $1,500. And again, that was due to the change in no live productions, and they needed to purchase materials for remote learners and due to COVID restrictions of sharing materials.
Any questions?
John, can I ask, what is it that covers staff transportation between schools? Like, what would that be?
We have teachers and art teachers that travel between the schools that we reimburse mileage for. There's teachers that teach both at different elementary schools or middle schools, and elementary at high school and the A school that we process mileage expense for. Most of the mileage expense is budgeted, but I believe that this year, due to the change in the budget at the end of the year, they need a little bit more in that line than what was anticipated when the budget was originally created.
So as a follow-up, why would that expense fall all to East Ridge? Like, is there an inter-school agreement?
There is.
Okay.
It's the assignments that the teachers are given.
Okay. That makes sense.
Any other questions? I will entertain a motion to approve the transfers. Do I have a second to approve the transfers for the fiscal year 2020-21 as presented? Second is Ken. Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, all those opposed? All those abstaining? Liz is abstaining?
I just can't hear, so I'm abstaining, so you guys.
If first procedurally, again, if we objected to a particular transfer, how would that work?
It wouldn't occur.
I think if the board, I mean, if the whole board objected to it?
Yeah.
The
whole board, well, yeah,
okay.
like, yeah, exactly, it was
Yeah.
7-2.
It's a great procedural question. I don't know that I've seen that happen before, but I think that we would have to go back and we'd have to have a conversation with the superintendent and with the business manager to get some understanding around it and potentially even reverse it if that were, yeah, absolutely. Good question. Okay, next is update on unbudgeted COVID-19 expenses.
Before I get into that, I do have one update that I believe Ms. Vogel had asked for in the past. She had mentioned that the vacation payout was quite large this year, and that why would we not have a budgeted line item in order to cover or these anticipated payouts. We did pull the last 4 years of actual payouts, and this past year was quite a different scenario compared to the years before that. This past year, there were 5 retirements in the administrative area with vacation payouts with the amount of approximately $86,000. Prior to that, year 18-19, there were only 3, and that payout was $33,000. In the year 16-17, there were only 2, and that was approximately $23,000. And then in 15-16, there were 3, and that was approximately $39,000. So we averaged between 25 and 40 maybe on an average basis. So this year when we create the budget, we will add an account in order to budget for anticipated payout of vacation, whether it stays in the budget, hopefully we'll be able to build something in that line or not, but we'll see.
You could average, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
by person,
Thank you for that.
anticipate the number.
And then the last item, the update of the unbudgeted COVID-19 expenses at this time. We have, as I had mentioned earlier, $890,736 worth. Facilities has $354,000 of expenditures. Nurses, $28,000. Special education, $12,000. Technology, $459,000. And curriculum, $37,000. That's broken out. Most of that unbudgeted expenditure is technology equipment and $459,000. And then there's a pretty close race between supplies and supplies PPE with $139,000 supplies and $149,000 supplies PPE. And then some smaller amounts for partitions, the HAZVAC system, storage containers, tents, and some curriculum. And that number changes as needs are purchased.
And some of these are rentals?
No, nothing we have purchased is a rental.
So we own our tents now?
We own our tents.
We sure do.
Nice.
Circus.
Yes, we do. It was, at the time, it was cheaper to purchase
Yeah.
it than it was to rent it, and therefore we went with
Makes
the
sense.
purchase part.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
In addition to what we have already spent, we are looking at approximately $1,634,000 in additional expenses that will occur, some of it throughout the year due to it being salaries, and some of it in additional PPE, protective supplies, and training materials that we're gonna need to purchase.
Can I ask one question on the anticipated expenditures?
Sure.
And I apologize if this has been asked and answered. Clearly my hearing needs help. Is there any additional anticipated expenditures on technology, either infrastructure or devices or anything that you think you need now that you've been through a few months of this and started to come back? Are there other things we should be thinking about on the tech infrastructure, either hardware or software, to support the learning of our students?
You want me to take that one?
Sure.
So Liz, right now, I think if anything, the technology for teachers, some of their devices are incredibly old. So that would be a piece, although we do have some technology coming in that we may be able to make those shifts. The Chromebooks aren't ideal for all of the needs of teachers, whether it's IEP Direct or some of those other elements, but so that may be an additional expenditure. On the back end, I think we are okay for now. I don't know what the needs will be for teachers at home should we go into a high-risk scenario, but I think we're pretty well prepared there. Some of the smart board technology, the boards, we've replaced, as you know, a lot this year. There may need to be some shifts on that end, which could bump that cost up a little bit. But I don't expect that to be the highest end, and I would say on the anticipated, what I'm hoping stays far away from us is that custodial overtime for Saturdays. So if we can avoid that, we'll be in a better position to end the school year, even if the technology scoots up a little bit.
All right, thank you.
Actually, to piggyback to Ken's questions, kind of related to COVID, but not really related. So if we bought all this stuff, we're gonna have tents galore in closets whenever we don't need them anymore. So I just wonder about, like, on the selling side of things, if we have an opportunity to be able to do that. I think we have a policy around that.
We do, selling.
Yeah, so, okay.
But why wouldn't we use that as an opportunity to continue having outdoor classes? I mean,
Or, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Even absent COVID, there's benefits to fresh air learning anyway.
So really maybe the conversation is, at the end of this, on the other side of it,
Right.
can we have a
What's
conversation,
our
an
plan?
agenda item where we talk about how we,
Possible uses.
possible uses or sales or whatever.
Yeah.
some
I think there's a lot of silver linings to the outdoor spaces and people
Yeah.
being creative, and
Yep.
so hopefully that's still an opportunity
Build
come
on that.
next year, at least in the climate that allows for us to
Sure,
be
no,
outdoors. But I imagine if they were
Yes,
selling
no.
tents, there would be a lot in this state on eBay, that's what I.
Well, that's, yeah, so I don't know that, I don't know that there's value to
Yes,
see
tents
that.
everywhere.
We
Yeah.
used to run a wedding business.
That's right.
That's right.
Very fair.
Any other questions about unbudgeted expenses? Thank you. All right, moving on to the next agenda item, which is item of information, the enrollment update.
Yes, I'll just share briefly, we'll actually come back after October 1st to give you our October 1st counts, but on the 24th of September, we were just under 92 children. We didn't project out the 18 to 21 or the outbreaks, but 92 children across all 9 schools, less than what we originally projected. Again, given the circumstances with COVID, it's hard to know how this number was shifted as a result of that, and families choosing to outplace. If you remember, we had about 55 children that, not outplace, homeschool. We had about 55 children that elected to homeschool this year, which was up from, I believe, 9 from the year before. So we'll be back October 13th with our October 1st count.
What this highlighted for me when I looked at it is how difficult it's gonna be for us during budget time to try to predict enrollment numbers for next year. Because not only do we have this, with potentially people coming back and being homeschooled, we have all these sales that we keep hearing about in houses in the area, and I don't really have a sense of, how much influx and outflux there is and stuff. And I don't know necessarily when Malone and McBroom come and speak to us, that they're gonna have much of a sense either on that.
Yeah, I think to track this especially, again, it's hard because you're in the budget season in October. That's when you start, when reality is that we'll probably have a better sense of what's real, should all things go well in the spring.
Right. Okay. Any questions about the enrollment report? Okay, moving on to correspondence to the board. Public comment. Jonathan, do we have any?
We do. Hold on one second. Karina, are you paying attention? You with us, Karina? Okay, the first is from Karen Solzinski at Great Pond Road. True advocates for our children are few and far between. Karina Drake showed herself to be a true advocate during her time on the Board of Education. Her wisdom and courage were refreshing and needed. Karina is authentic, brilliant, and empathetic. Most of all, she knew her job and never wavered from it. Every comment, every action she took showed her singular priority to do what is right, not what is easy, not what is cheap, but what will serve the needs of all our children. Thank you, Karina, for your service to the community. Your voice will be missed. Next up is Gigi Christel, 19 Main Street. Karina Drake will leave a big hole in our BOE. She always speaks up for children and puts their needs ahead of anything else. She always has the facts that she has researched. She challenges the status quo and always pushes our district and board to do better. Great thanks are owed to Karina for her significant contribution to our community. I'm sorry to see her go. Next is from Colleen Broderick, 18 Mimosa Court. Karina Drake stood out on the BOE for her focus on what's best for kids. I'm sorry to see her go. Her background as a nurse and children's advocate showed in every comment. Her comments were always backed up by facts and research. She didn't complain, she offered solutions. She didn't count pennies, she advocated for spending on the right things, not just the convenient things. She embodied the job description by pushing our district to improve and keeping her focus on what's best for children and nothing else. Thank you, Karina, for your service. Next is Mary Doherty, 43 Ripplewong Road. Thank you to Karina Drake for her service to our children and community. I appreciate the many hours, extensive research, and thoughtful questions that she asked. Her questions and comments always move the conversation forward in a constructive way. Pam Hartnett, 204 Mimosa Circle. I want to thank Karina Drake for her relentless support of all Ridgefield kids. She has fought for what is right despite resistance. She is well-read, well-researched, and well-intended. We will miss you, Karina. Thank you for all the wonderful things you have done. And Cheryl Knapp, 146 North Salem Road. The Ridgefield BOE is losing a tireless advocate tonight. Karina's keen intellect, common sense, deep empathy, and immense passion for helping the children of Ridgefield has been evident at every meeting. She will be sorely missed. I thank her for her service. That's all we have.
Thank you. Karina, your last correspondence report.
We have received 11 emails. One was about billing policy, 6 regarding reopening, 1 regarding technology, 1 about COVID testing question, 1 was a board matter, and 1 was a town matter.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, do I have a motion to move into executive session? Karina, do you want to read that?
I move that the board move into executive session.
For the purpose of discussion concerning the performance of an employee, and invite in Dr. De Silva and Karen Dewing. Sorry. Thank you, Karina, for the motion. Do I have a second? Jonathan? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, the board will now convene in